Penelope, whom I have referred to as Penny throughout our 28-year marriage, has recently commenced her studies at a local college. This marks the end of an era, as our third and youngest child has now left the family home. As a result, we have become empty nesters. This transition has prompted me to consider ways of revitalizing Penny and my personal relationship, which has been somewhat neglected during our marriage. I believe this is largely due to a lack of energy and privacy. As working-class people, we reside in a modest house with thin walls, not a spacious mansion with nannies and maids. I considered that everything was going according to plan and that my plan would succeed as soon as we returned home. I carried Penny upstairs, despite her protests. Mike, my spouse, said, "My butt hurts after the trip," and allowed me to take a shower first. I engaged in sexual intercourse with her, which she appeared to enjoy. I hoped this would be a harbinger of things to come. Despite the passage of time and the evolution of circumstances, I remained passionately in love with my wife and still experienced a profound sexual attraction to her. At 48 years old, I found myself still aroused by her presence. Penny, my wife, was a nurse and was in training when we met. Between the births of her children and the subsequent constraints of raising them, Penny remained a general nurse. She had observed and commented on more than one occasion when younger nurses would come to the hospital. Upon entering the workforce, one may choose to pursue either a basic course of study or a more advanced degree. Alternatively, one may opt to advance within their current role. In Penny's case, she was determined to pursue the latter option. Penny's decision to advance within her field was not met with approval from all quarters. In fact, she was openly criticized by colleagues who felt that she was betraying the values of the profession. However, Penny was undeterred. She was convinced that her decision was the best course of action for her career. Penny's determination was further bolstered by her observation of a chronic shortage of pediatric nurses at her place of work. This shortage, she believed, could be addressed by undertaking a specialized training program. The training course will allow Penny to remain employed at the same hospital. She was certain that the head nurse of the same department in another hospital in the city would retire in 2 years and she would be able to apply for this vacancy. This will put Penny in a prime position to succeed her current hospital's matron when she retires in 5 years. This is the main prize that Penny was counting on. She did her research and found out that she could be paid during the 6 months of training, so it would not be a burden on her modest income. An increased salary would facilitate the achievement of our goal of retiring at 60 with a comfortable bank account. I observed Penny, astonished at this newly manifested ambition. It was akin to seeing her for the first time, simultaneously frightening and exhilarating. I came to recognize that my wife was still capable of surprising me, though I was also disconcerted by the meticulous planning evident in her actions. I questioned why I had only just learned of these developments for the first time. Why had she not sought my counsel or assistance? Why had she concealed these aspirations, dreams, and plans from me? Had I not consistently encouraged her? Even now, I experienced a growing sense of anxiety. Initially, I was inclined to support her dream. However, the rationale behind her decision became clear. The only location where Penny could pursue this course was in another state, a 250-mile flight away. It has been 6 months, which is a significant duration. Is there a more convenient option? They do not offer an online course. Moreover, the time frame is not insignificant. During the course of the war, couples often undertook similar journeys. They managed to maintain communication through letters for years. Financially, we are able to support you in flying in once a month. I remained silent. I was pondering the questions and answers before I could voice any objections or further questions. Penny then exclaimed angrily, "Jesus, Mike, don't be so arrogant." This made me wince. I have never been arrogant, not with her, not with our daughters. I was so offended that I almost missed the rest of her outrage. If it was about you and your career, the whole world would expect support and encouragement from me. However, since I am a woman, you think that I am selfish for wanting you to support me in my dream. Selfish? When did I even have the opportunity to make such an accusation? I barely had a chance to interject. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. Anger will not lead to a productive outcome. Penny, I am not selfish and I do not blame you for your perspective. I am simply trying to understand the situation. You have clearly devoted a significant amount of time to this issue, whereas I only had 10 minutes to consider it. Penny immediately expressed remorse. Her tone shifted from harsh to neutral as she elaborated further. Providing housing for student nurses and employing them in a teaching hospital will help to minimize the depletion of our pension funds. Penny's return to a place of residence for a period of 6 months would likely be impractical, given the considerable demands on her time. However, it would be feasible for me to facilitate her travel to my location on a monthly basis with the objective of spending a weekend together. The proposed arrangement appeared to be a reasonable one, but I must acknowledge that the discrepancy between my immediate plans and Penny's was a source of confusion. In retrospect, this discrepancy may have made me susceptible to influence. Penny proceeded to nibble on my ear, effectively initiating a second round of sexual activity. In such circumstances, it is likely that any male with a high libido would have acquiesced. I consented to nearly any proposal, and thus Penny was permitted to attend the subsequent course. The final detonation occurred as she hastily boarded the vessel. The following week, my carefully considered inquiries were rendered moot. I had already acquiesced. I recall that I felt as though I was being manipulated. Penny departed after a flurry of activities, appearing as though she were attending her inaugural camp. She was so elated that she barely remembered to kiss me goodbye. I am ashamed to admit that I struggled to adjust to the new daily routine for many years. I was no longer required to contemplate what I would. I am culpable of delegating the organization of our social activities to Penny. I was content for her to prioritize the side of the family with whom I was not closely connected, provided that she made time for me. I am not alone in this knowledge, as I am aware that the same application deceives the majority of the male colleagues with whom I work. The majority of Penny's evenings and weekends, with the exception of the time spent with her children, were occupied with activities that Penny had organized and devoted to us. Alternatively, I undertook the necessary tasks in life, such as mowing the lawn, washing cars and driving the children to and from sporting events. Now, from 6 p.m. until 10 p.m. upon my return from work. From 6 p.m. until 11 p.m., I experienced feelings of loneliness and boredom. It was not that I was accustomed to engaging in activities on a regular basis, as we did not do so. However, there was no one with whom to converse when the news anchor reported another misstep by one of our politicians, or to hold hands and laugh while watching our favorite television program. I even missed Penny's habit of rubbing her feet during the first week of her absence. We spoke for 30 minutes each evening. I must admit that I questioned whether she had considered the impact of our rising phone bill when planning. Budgeting. Furthermore, I must acknowledge that I experienced feelings of envy. She was evidently occupied and thriving in her new endeavor. During our conversations, she shared updates about her life, and her enthusiasm was evident. The names of individuals I was unfamiliar with stood out prominently. This made me feel excluded and as if I no longer had a role in her life. However, our conversations consistently concluded on a positive note, instilling a sense of hope. Perhaps her absence will strengthen our bond, and upon her return, we can resume our sexual relationship by the second week of our 30-day plan. Evening conversations had decreased in length from 30 minutes to 20 minutes. Penny stated that she needed to study, and our conversations were disrupting her nursing mindset. I was now perceived as an intrusive interlocutor. I attempted to conclude our conversations on a loving note, but by the end of the week, the interactions felt somewhat one-sided. Despite my best efforts to remain encouraging and supportive, I found myself increasingly frustrated and lonely. In the third week, she proposed a new rule: we would only call each other once every 2 evenings. Interestingly, she suggested that she call me and not vice versa, reasoning that it would prevent her from being distracted by me at inconvenient times. In the fourth week, I only received 2 calls. I attempted to be understanding about this. She had her first serious assignment and was working the evening shift, which made it difficult for her. I was pleased that I would be flying to her on the weekend. I missed her and us. However, fate had other plans. My planned trip had to be cancelled at the last minute because Penny said that due to an influenza outbreak and an influx of patients at the teaching hospital, the work environment was characterized by intense pressure and high levels of stress. The weekend did, however, offer some reprieve, and I was able to reconnect with an old friend from my past with whom I had become estranged over the years. He and a group of his acquaintances engaged in poker every Saturday night at a local pub. He extended an invitation for me to join them, and, given that I was experiencing a sense of exhaustion due to my prolonged period of unemployment and the apparent disregard of my wife, I accepted. The company was agreeable, and we engaged in a few cordial games in the rear of the establishment. Subsequently, we proceeded to the bar for some tranquil refreshment, as my social interactions had previously been confined to neighborhood barbecues, modest local gatherings, and informal family-style meals. The establishment, a pub, proved to be a rather astonishing revelation. I was taken aback by the sheer number of women, roughly my age or slightly younger, who approached me with remarkable boldness and, in a rather direct manner, attempted to initiate a romantic encounter. It is rather amusing how, after a few years of marital bliss and the responsibilities associated with raising children, one can easily forget that such interactions are not uncommon in bars. It took 3 consecutive Saturdays, and I must admit, a number of other days during the week when it was evident that Penny would not call that evening, before the persistent nature of these interactions reached a point where it could no longer be dismissed as mere coincidence. I decided to inquire with my Jeff. I must inquire as to the nature of your inquiry. Mike, you appear to be digressing from the topic at hand. Have you not observed that at our age, there are already discernibly more single women than single men? The women you see are widows who have been abandoned for a younger model, abandoned due to a midlife crisis, or deceived by cheaters. However, why me? Come now, Mike, you have been married for so long that your confidence as a man is inextricably tied to what your wife thinks and says. Look in the mirror and then look around you. You appear to be in better physical condition than most, and because of your physical labor, you are still lean and muscular. You do not have a wife chasing you around with a shotgun, and you do not sit at home with her. For an extended period, one's self-assurance as a man is inextricably linked to the opinions and statements of one's spouse. Upon reflection, it is evident that you possess a more favorable physical appearance than the majority of individuals. Due to your involvement in manual labor, you have retained a lean and muscular physique. You are not subjected to the fear of being pursued by a firearm-wielding spouse, nor do you find yourself confined to the domestic sphere. The children, if you were to remove your wedding ring, you would likely engage in sexual intercourse with one of them within 2 hours, without utilizing a single chat line or purchasing a single beverage. I surveyed the area, noting the presence of numerous individuals exhibiting a desire for sexual intercourse. Jeff followed my gaze. I am not inclined to engage in infidelity with Penny. I acknowledge that perspective, but let us consider a hypothetical scenario in which you are a commodity. If I were in your position, I would avoid being too aggressive. It is evident that these women are here with the sole intention of seeking sexual encounters. It is, however, important to note that approximately half of them are likely to be married and merely seeking a brief sexual encounter. This observation can be extended to the men present in this establishment, as approximately half of them may also be seeking a sexual encounter. A woman of approximately 40 years of age is observed in the company of 5 friends. The woman's demeanor suggests that she has recently been replaced by a younger model and is now being consoled by her friends. It is probable that she will return in a few weeks, seeking sexual gratification in order to reassure herself of her continued attractiveness and to attribute blame to her former partner. One might posit that the husband is at fault, or that revenge is being sought if a quick encounter is desired. In such a case, it is advisable to remove one's wedding ring. The decision ultimately depends on one's intentions. If a long-term relationship is sought, it would be prudent to observe the group at the table pointed out by Jeff. 4 women of approximately the same age were seated nearby. They appeared to be enjoying themselves, as evidenced by their laughter. It seemed that 2 of them were married, while the other 2 were not. As we observed, 3 of them surveyed the room. This is an environment that would appeal to a single individual. It is a gathering of professional women who have chosen to socialize together. The time spent together was limited. 2 of the women were married, yet this did not prevent one of them from seeking romantic involvement. The other 2 were lonely but not desperate. They may take advantage of the opportunity, but they will not actively seek it at that moment. My cell phone buzzed with an incoming text message from Penny. She was apologizing and explaining her actions. She informed me that she was currently engaged in work-related activities and was unable to take a break to call me. I attempted to express my gratitude for her effort to communicate, but it was challenging given the decreasing frequency of calls and texts as her absence extended. It was difficult to maintain a sense of gratitude, but at least she had not forgotten to sign her messages. The use of the term "love you" in the message was a notable improvement over her previous 2 messages. I responded with a brief "I love you too" before turning my attention to Jeff. I suggested that he prove his point by removing his ring and going to the bar area closest to the table where she was seated. I then encouraged him to order a drink. I did as he suggested. He suggested that I lean against the counter in anticipation of being served. I observed the proceedings from the periphery of my vision. My elbows had been resting on the tabletop for no more than 60 seconds when one of the married women abruptly stood up, tucked a ring into her pocket, and inquired if she could purchase a drink for me. She then offered me a drink, but lost interest as soon as I informed her of my marital status. I must concede that I also informed her that I had observed her removing her wedding ring. She displayed a modicum of embarrassment, and the other women at her table were observing the situation. Before she could depart, one of the unmarried women approached me. She approached me just as the bartender was taking my order and then waited for my drink to arrive before placing her order. Upon observing the state of their glasses, which were at least half full, I was not surprised when my new neighbor at the bar said hello and initiated polite conversation. A cursory observation revealed that she did not align with my personal preferences. It appeared that my body language may have conveyed this, as she promptly returned to her table with a round of drinks. I continued to sip my drink, awaiting Jeff's return from the restroom to discuss how accurate my initial assessment had been. However, I was startled by a quiet greeting behind me. I turned to see the second unmarried woman from the table, who was looking at me with a confident gaze. Given my newfound understanding of the alignment, I surmised that she was attempting to create an opportunity. Nevertheless, I was not overly concerned if it did not materialize, as I would still find her intriguing if I were single. To ascertain her age, I considered the possibility that she might be either my age or 5 to 10 years younger. She was attractive, with slim but not anorectic features, soft honey-colored hair curling around her face, and a genuine smile. I observed her ring finger, but I did not see an untanned mark. I then looked at my own ring, which I only wore when going out, and I did not see a mark on my finger either. Tradition required that I offer her a drink. She replied that there was no need, and she picked up her glass and carefully tilted it this way and that before taking a sip. Her voice conveyed a confidence that was very attractive. She is clearly a woman who is comfortable. In her own right, we commenced a casual dialogue encompassing a plethora of topics. 10 minutes later, I was compelled to divulge that I was, in fact, married, despite the absence of a ring. I could have fabricated a story regarding the whereabouts and purpose of the ring in my pocket, but a compelling force compelled me to be wholly truthful. Andrea, as it transpired, was the name of the attractive blonde who had questioned me about my behavior, which at first glance was perceived as unkind and deceitful. In my defense, one of your friends approached me just 20 minutes ago. She was so forthright that she did not attempt to be subtle as she removed her rings. She then proceeded to place the rings into a pocket. This is Carol. She is not a close acquaintance of mine, I had only just met her that evening. She was accompanied by Sue, who is a friend of mine. They work together. I was genuinely astonished when I observed this behavior. It evokes a certain degree of sympathy for her husband, does it not? I nodded in agreement. I removed my information from the site not because I sought entertainment, but because I was evaluating a hypothesis proposed by my acquaintance Jeff regarding the reasons why women of our age group frequent bars. Andrea expressed considerable amusement when I elucidated Jeff's hypothesis in detail. She largely concurred with his assertions. Subsequently, the discussion shifted to Penny, my wife, who has been on a 6-month course out of state for almost 2 months. I have been on a month-long course out of state for almost 2 months. I must admit that I feel somewhat adrift without her. I imagine you must miss her too. She is preoccupied with work and study, and we do not even get to talk often. That is why I came here. I am tired of sitting alone and staring at the 4 walls of our living room. You are simply looking for company. You do not seek sexual encounters or one-night stands. I was somewhat taken aback by her frank question. I am monogamous, but this does not mean that Andrea expressed her approval of my response. We proceeded to engage in further discussion. Andrea described her experience of investing heavily in her children during their upbringing, which resulted in a significant shift in dynamics when they reached adulthood. 6 months ago, she and her husband made the decision to separate amicably, a choice she found beneficial. However, she did not rule out the possibility of a future relationship should the right individual come along. We conversed for over an hour, during which time it became evident that her friends were departing. I observed Andrea deliberating over whether to remain or depart, but ultimately she opted to leave. I regarded her contemplation over staying as a compliment, as it indicated that she found my company and conversation agreeable, despite the lack of potential for a romantic relationship. Following Penny's rejections, this was a welcome change. Penny's phone calls became even the frequency of our interactions decreased, with conversations occurring only twice a week for a duration of 5 to 10 minutes each. I deliberately adopted a more relaxed outlook on life, recognizing the importance of maintaining my mental well-being. It became evident that there was no point in persisting in my efforts to persuade Penny, given her lack of interest. On a few occasions, she even advised me to cease my attempts to influence her decisions, calling me a child and suggesting that my actions were causing her undue stress. This led me to question whether she was facing similar challenges and whether my persistent objections and denials were adding to her burdens. My complaints and assertions were met with indifference, and in retaliation, I was deprived of communication for 5 days. I was determined not to succumb to despair and to resist the feeling of being at the mercy of Penny's whims. Consequently, I began attending the bar on several occasions each week, merely to engage in conversation and socialize. Penny's schedule the following weekend proved to be an inconvenience, as she had commitments that required her attention. Our separation had lasted for 10 weeks, and I found myself in a position of being inconvenient. I sensed that I was of little consequence to her. During the last 3 conversations, she did not make any effort to find time for me or for us. When she announced the following week that she was suffering from heavy periods and was not in the mood to accept me, I was not surprised. The next evening, I broke protocol and called her on her cell phone. One of her roommates responded to me and said that Penny was taking sleeping pills and had gone to bed. She took pills and retired for the evening, leaving her phone number with a friend for future reference. I was quite content with my social life. It was far more active than remaining at home awaiting phone calls that never came. The lack of phone calls made me feel like a loser, akin to a teenage individual who is perpetually waiting for a call that never comes. I joined the Thursday night darts competition, as one of the teams had a player who was transferred to another state. I also participated in the Tuesday night quiz. I participated in a greater number of quizzes than I had anticipated. I encountered a multitude of intriguing individuals from diverse backgrounds. I frequently informed unaccompanied females that I was wed and not amenable to infidelity. I frequently observed Andrea, who would approach me when she was in attendance with her companions. She began spending time with a gentleman and recognized that he was sufficiently intriguing to commence a romantic relationship with him. However, this only persisted for 2 weeks before he vanished, according to her. She was unable to withstand his absence. The level of sexual activity was considerable, and this suited her. It failed the severity test. We were very careful to avoid serious conversations about Penny and my relationship. Andrea never once expressed her opinion about Penny or her behavior, which was fine with me. I was angry at my wife and her complete disregard for me. We did not see each other for 14 weeks, and phone calls continued to be rare and short. When we did talk, I felt like I was imposing myself on her. It is understandable that she was preoccupied with work and school. She had assumed the challenging role of balancing these responsibilities, yet I was not to be overlooked. Could the regular brief interactions and texting really be so detrimental to her objective? As time passed and I spent more time with Andrea, I found myself increasingly drawn to her. She exuded warmth, amiability, and intelligence. I even felt a sense of fulfillment when she sought my assistance, particularly when she approached a new romantic interest. If the bar or someone approached her, I would wait for her signal if she wasn't interested but had a hard time leaving. She would give me a sign, and I would walk over, kiss her on the cheek, and let the guy know we were a couple. He would then leave, and I would chat with Andrea until he did. What bothered me was how impatient I was looking forward to talking to her. She was an excellent conversationalist, and we actually talked. There was no flirting unless you consider discussing Pepsi versus Coca-Cola. Despite the absence of any impropriety, I experienced a sense of disappointment if I did not see her in the evenings for the first time in my life. This led me to recognize the potential for seduction in the context of an affair. I came to understand that the conventional wisdom, as exemplified by the notion that my wife does not understand me or that she ignores me, is not the complete picture. I have come to recognize that infidelity is not inherently wrong, but rather that it is a decision that can be made in certain circumstances. I have gained a deeper understanding of the ways in which an individual can find themselves slipping into an affair. I was strongly tempted. It was a situation I had never imagined I would find myself in. With the passage of each day, my ability to resist temptation grew increasingly weaker. Thus far, I managed to control myself and refrain from any inappropriate physical contact with Andrea. However, I was not without my own personal challenges. I was acutely aware of the daily reminders of Penny's indifference. I was uncertain about my ability to maintain my resolve for an extended period. I considered the possibility that Penny might be experiencing similar thoughts and feelings, but I quickly dismissed it. She is preoccupied with her studies and professional obligations, and it is unlikely that she would have the opportunity to pursue a romantic relationship with another man. However, we were only halfway through her training course, and I recognized the necessity to take action to prevent the deterioration of our marriage before the 6-month period was over. I was compelled to consider the possibility of becoming unfaithful to my spouse, a scenario that I had never envisioned. I decided to call Penny without expecting her to call me. "Hello, darling." I cannot speak for a long time. I held back my irritation at her first sentence. Anger is not a productive emotion. I know you always seem to be busy, but I need you to find time now. I'll be brief. I heard her sigh of impatience and swallowed a little more. Penny, I will be brief. You are no longer available to me. The frequency of our telephone conversations has decreased, and even when we speak, you treat me as if I am an inconvenience. You deny my feelings and needs as though I no longer exist. It is as though you have forgotten that there are two people in our marriage. I am here to love, support, and encourage. I also deserve some time and attention. I had hoped that my words would be heard and understood, but it seems that I was mistaken. I have spent my entire adult life putting my family first. Now, it seems, it is my turn to be considered. You make it sound as though I did not prioritize our family, Penny. It is as though you are saying that I did not sacrifice or compromise for my family. I made significant personal sacrifices for the benefit of my family. He prioritized your needs and the well-being of our children. When did I have the opportunity to prioritize my own needs? I was likely preoccupied with work and may have overlooked this opportunity. I was offended by your implication that I did not prioritize my own needs. I chose to ignore her for the remainder of the conversation. For the following 60 seconds, I was aware that I did not wish to recall the insults that were being uttered by the other party. I attempted to communicate with Penny once more, stating that our marriage was in a state of crisis. It was evident that she was unable to perceive this, or perhaps even unwilling to accept it. If we did not take action, our marriage would be irreparably damaged. I implore you, Lord, to conclude this course of action. I am weary of your incessant whining and self-inflicted guilt. It is time for you to mature and take responsibility for your actions. I did not hear the remainder of her diatribe about the diet tribe because I terminated the call. This must have pricked her conscience because she immediately called back. Look, Mike, I am sorry for my behavior, but you must understand the gravity of this situation. Our marriage is not in crisis. I did not argue with her further. As the conversation progressed, it became evident that she was not receptive to my perspective. I expressed my feelings of longing for her and conveyed my regret for the difficulties she was facing without me. However, I also emphasized that, in the long run, our situation would improve. I suggested that she would eventually recognize the benefits of our separation and that we would be well positioned to resume a healthy and stable relationship when I returned. I also outlined my plans to reorganize the household and facilitate a return to a normal eating pattern. Her response took me by surprise. Her tone was condescending. I felt like a child being scolded. While it is challenging for me to be without her, I am not struggling in the way she assumed. She seemed to believe that I was incapable of taking care of myself. I surveyed the room. She appeared to be the same as always, clean, neat, and organized. I was able to manage daily tasks. My clothes were washed and the refrigerator is stocked, the floors and countertops are clean and the dishes are washed. She was unable to comprehend the situation. I miss intimacy and communication. I miss my wife, friend, and life partner after 28 years. Our lives were intertwined in every aspect, and her absence felt like a part of me had been cut off. He made a sound that she seemed to interpret as agreement. I am gratified that we have resolved this matter. It is now time for me to take my leave. After she had once again lost consciousness, failing to inform him of her affection, he took the keys and proceeded to the pub. Perhaps a cold ale would assuage his disappointment. By the time he had consumed half of his first glass of beer, I came to the realization that I had made a mistake. I was not in the mood to interact with people or engage in conversation. I was experiencing a range of negative emotions including hurt, anger, anxiety, resentment, and disappointment. My stomach was filled with a multitude of emotions akin to bubbles in a washing machine. Even Andrea's friendly smile could not lift my spirits. I proceeded to finish my last beer. I proceeded to leave the establishment with haste, returning home shortly after entering. I was promptly contacted via SMS, inquiring as to my well-being and expressing concern. The message included a request for me to contact the sender if I required emotional support. I gazed at the message, contemplating its contents. It became evident that the woman, with whom I had only recently formed a connection, demonstrated a depth of care and concern that surpassed anything I had previously experienced. In response to the message from my wife of 28 years, I sat down on the sofa and experienced a sense of uncertainty. I was unsure how to respond, particularly given that I had recently begun a romantic relationship with Andrea. I was concerned about the proximity of our relationship and whether I was at fault for engaging in an emotional affair. Prior to this, we had not discussed Penny or the state of my marriage. I had not revealed any of this information to my wife, and I was aware that I needed to be cautious. I informed her that I was fine and that it had simply been a challenging day. I suggested that we meet again on Thursday if she was available. I then proceeded to ascertain the level of informality of the situation before initiating the transmission. I proceeded to reheat the leftovers and transmit them via the AE system while standing at the sink as I ate. I then became aware that Penny and I had not discussed my planned visit the following weekend. Penny did not offer any input, so I decided to book a spontaneous plane ticket for next Friday. I was eager to see my wife and to spend time with her. To see her face, hear her laugh, and smell her hair, to remind myself of the depth of my feelings for her. Despite the unlikelihood of Penny misbehaving during my absence, I decided to make my visit a surprise. This way, she would not be able to brush me off again. Finally, Friday came. I left work early and went straight to the airport. Everything proceeded according to plan, and by 6 p.m., I arrived at Penny's residence. The call was answered by a woman whose voice I recognized as Jenny, the individual who typically responds to Penny's calls. She directed me into their modest living room and informed me that Penny and their other roommate, Gail, were not yet home from school. As I retrieved my phone from my pocket, she gestured in my direction, indicating that she would contact Penny. Her demeanor suggested a degree of concern. Before she could press the requisite 3 buttons, the sound of a key in the front door indicated Penny's return. Her demeanor was notably pleased. Upon seeing me, she gave me a brief kiss before excusing herself to the restroom. I found it peculiar that she took her phone with her, but since Jenny was standing nearby, I did not inquire further. Jenny and I engaged in a somewhat awkward conversation while waiting for Penny, who seemed to be in the restroom for an extended period of time. Before she had a chance to return to the hallway, she hastily proceeded down the corridor to her room, instructing me to continue talking to Jenny. As the evening progressed, Jenny appeared to become more relaxed, and our conversation became less tense. The age difference between us was not a significant issue during our conversation. I observed Penny retrieve a load of sheets from the laundry room and return with fresh ones. I noted with interest that she seemed to be attempting to make a positive impression on me, dressing me in a manner similar to how she did when we were dating. Once the room was sufficiently tidied, as Penny had requested, she invited me to shower and freshen up with her before we proceeded to the next stage of our evening. Despite the frigid conditions, Penny opened the window in her room, which seemed peculiar to me, given my awareness of her aversion to the cold. After a period of more than 3 months, witnessing Penny in a state of undress, I was overcome with a powerful urge. I proposed, but was advised to wait until after dinner for dessert. It was late, and Penny was hungry. We managed to arrive at a seafood restaurant that Penny had previously mentioned, where she reacted with amusement to it. My traditional seafood restaurant joke, I do not believe the stories about oysters being an aphrodisiac. I ate 12 once, and the last 3 did not have the desired effect. I decided that my decision to surprise her was the right one. We had a good time with 2 bottles of good red wine between us, but one detail made the evening what it was. That detail made this evening just good, not great. Penny kept interrupting our conversations to read and then respond to text messages. I considered whether to discuss this topic, given that we have taught our children that such behavior is inappropriate. However, I brought it up. She replied, "You know that normally I wouldn't do something like this." She then explained that she was one of the older students and that some of the younger ones looked up to her as a mentor. She added that she did not intend to do so for a long time. While replying to another SMS, she asked how long I intended to stay. Given that she had 2 tasks to complete over the weekend, I attempted to avoid feeling overwhelmed by her question. I had only just arrived when she was already preparing to leave for home. Despite my desire to be alone with Penny, I took my time at dinner, courting her as if we were young lovers rather than an old married couple who knew each other intimately. By the time we walked hand in hand for approximately 7 blocks to Penny's house, it was already 11 o'clock. A second vehicle was present in the driveway, which Penny identified as belonging to Gail. Gail, I was informed, was employed as a waitress to finance her studies, typically concluding her shifts at 10 p.m. The apartment was relatively quiet, illuminated only by the hallway light. Upon entering following our post-dinner and wine repast, and in addition to the aforementioned shower, I was on edge. The period for courtship had elapsed. I lifted my wife in my arms and carried her. I carried her to her room and placed her on the bed. After 15 weeks of abstinence, I was overcome with the urge to engage in sexual intercourse with her. However, I resisted the temptation and instead opted for a more gentle approach. That evening, she seemed to be on the verge of consciousness. Our interactions during dinner and our walks back and forth were somewhat strained, as if we were strangers. The conversation was slightly awkward, as though we were not as familiar with each other as we once were. There was a notable absence of shared experiences between us, as evidenced by the stark contrast between our interactions just 4 months prior and those on this occasion. I was acutely aware of the need to make a positive impression and to provide a level of satisfaction. As Penny reclined on the bed, exhibiting signs of fatigue and a slight degree of inebriation, I swiftly removed her undergarments and she reciprocated in kind. She appeared somewhat perplexed, which provided me with the opportunity to rapidly disrobe. Penny then began to engage in rhythmic thrusting and vocalized her pleasure. The experience was markedly different from what I had previously encountered. From Penny, I knew the one who had always been somewhat reserved. I attributed her reticence sexually to her strict Catholic upbringing. This and 3 children in the apartment knew that Penny was having fun and did not care who knew about it. I was in uncharted territory when Penny relaxed like a rag doll. Her recovery and pulling me to her chest was all the guidance I needed. I believe that I found our sex life to be as much of a source of frustration during our separation as I had previously experienced. I was in a state of immense bliss. It is often said that heaven and hell are separated by a mere molecule. This is undoubtedly true. Just before I lost control, there was an impatient knock on the flimsy inner bedroom door. An unfamiliar female voice shouted, "Jake, for heaven's sake, Penny." This occurred on 3 consecutive nights. Sleep was the verbal equivalent of a bucket of ice water. Many things suddenly made sense, including a shaved pubic area, a strange stranger between us, a reduction in phone calls, opposition every time I suggested coming to visit, a sudden change of bed linen, and even her disappearing into the bathroom for an awkward time when she first came home and found me there. I could well imagine her in the bathroom, which was a source of great distress for me. Toilet whispering to her boyfriend about a change of plans. Was it really him that she was texting the whole time we were in the restaurant? I looked into her eyes and saw horror. I observed a man who knew he had to say something and quickly, but did not know what words to use to save a disastrous situation. I looked down at her. Her hair was a mess and her makeup was smeared. The legs that I once considered the longest and most beautiful on the planet disgusted me. I considered the longest and most beautiful on the planet to be repulsive. Her entire appearance was unappealing. She now resembled the adulteress she was, a traitor. I saw only the traitor, and I knew I had to leave the situation before my survival instincts took over and I did her harm. She was not worth going to jail over. I quickly put on my scattered clothes and I was left with only an unpacked carry-on. I proceeded to close and zip the bag, avoiding any direct contact with her gaze. I was unable to look at her directly. I was already experiencing a lack of control, and her appearance only served to exacerbate this. Penny was unaware of how close I came to succumbing to my resentment over her betrayal and resorting to physical violence. I was only vaguely aware of her words, and the passage of time has not diminished my feelings. 6 months is a significant duration, and I have only been absent for 15 weeks. I suspect that it was only a few weeks ago that you began your infidelity. What, then, was it about me that you found lacking? I, too, was alone for the same amount of time. The other students are enjoying themselves with each other. How many of them have husbands at home? You made me feel young and free again, not on the threshold of becoming a grandparent. Thank you for telling me that there is more than just good. Despite the challenges, I am confident that I can overcome this obstacle. However, it seems that Penny has other plans. As I approached the door, I heard her screams becoming louder and more desperate. I could not ignore the growing concern in her voice. Finally, I opened the door to find Penny standing there, suitcase in hand, boots untied and not looking over my shoulder. She was pushed from the outside, almost hitting me in the face. At the same time, I pulled her from the inside, which resulted in my finding myself face to face with a young woman whom I believed to be Gail. Over her shoulder, I observed Jenny, who appeared discouraged, as I proceeded to walk past my puzzled house toward the front door. I heard a voice say, "Who the hell are you?" before the outer door was slammed shut. I called out to Penny's former my husband, emphasized the letter X, and subsequently vanished into the night. I had a plane to catch, a lawyer to meet, a marriage to end, a sad story to tell to family, friends, and acquaintances, and a honey blonde to get to know better at the bar. I was taken aback when Mike answered the phone, half expecting the call to go to voicemail like all the other calls I'd made over the past 4 days. "Hello," he said. "Penelope, what has transpired?" Despite my best efforts to communicate, I was unable to speak for an extended period. When he finally responded, I was rendered speechless. His demeanor was perplexing. He did not exhibit the expected emotional responses, neither heartbreak nor rage. Instead, he displayed indifference and neutrality, which I found disconcerting. In the ensuing silence, I felt as if I were nothing more than an acquaintance. I heard his sigh of impatience, which sounded loud. I was overcome with fear that he would hang up. "Please, Penelope, do it quickly. I don't have the whole day. I'm busy today. This is our quiz night." How could that make him busy? How can he prioritize this over our marriage? I blurted out, before I could filter my words. "Obviously, Penelope, you don't understand how important this is to me. I need it." I winced as I heard the echoes of previous conversations over the past 3 months. Part of me was ashamed of these conversations, but having Mike throw them in my face again made me angry. "Please do not belittle our marriage in such a manner, we need to talk. I might as well not speak or listen. I have to go, the team relies on my knowledge of history. I cannot let them down. Let us talk later." I looked at my phone. I was incredulous, as though the screen could deceive me, that Mike had just ended the call. I had consumed a glass of wine to calm my nerves before the conversation took an acrimonious turn, leaving a sour taste in my mouth. I reflected on my decision to remain in the situation rather than immediately returning home. I should not have allowed Mike time to cool down, I should have pursued him, even if it meant doing so in an unclothed state. What prevented me? I analyzed the situation and identified fear as the primary factor. The factors contributing to my decision included nerves, guilt, shame, and, of course, the desire to avoid hearing Mike call me every vile name under the sun. Undoubtedly, the training course also played a significant role. I had an important exam at the end of the module on Monday, and I was determined not to let 3 months of hard work go to waste. While I had enjoyed myself during my time away, I had also worked. I devoted a considerable amount of time and effort to studying for the examination, which I took yesterday. I attempted to distract myself from the urge to contact Mike on numerous occasions. Upon completion of the examination, I have yet to book a ticket home. I am aware that I am procrastinating, and I am unsure why. I had an unexpected encounter with Mickey in our own homemade apartment, which seemed more tangible than usual. For some reason, the house was considered to be Micah's territory, while the apartment was regarded as mine. It was a remote possibility, yet I clung to the hope that Mikey would return so we could converse on my turf. I lowered my head into my hands, grappling with the reality that 4 days had elapsed since Mike's departure. He had not returned to confront me. I glanced at my phone and saw that Jake had left several messages. I resisted the urge to open them. This was also challenging, particularly given the mounting pressure. The time on the screen showed that it was already 7 o'clock. It is too late to request time off from the course coordinator, we must wait until morning. I hoped I would not have to provide a detailed explanation for why I needed time off, it would be awkward. It would be sufficient to say that I have family matters to attend to. Putting the phone in my pocket, I walked into the kitchen and looked into the pantry. She sighed. Everything on offer seemed like too much work, and besides, I was unable to muster the usual appetite. I retired to my room, lay down on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. Despite my best efforts, sleep evaded me. My brain remained active, and I was unable to turn it off. I was at a loss as to how to make Mike understand that my absence was entirely unrelated to him and our marriage. I had never considered our marriage to be in jeopardy. I had always loved him, and I still do. A flash of anger always ran through me. I considered the male ego and pride to be the root of the problem. I had broken my wedding vows, but only in a physical sense. My heart and mind still belonged to Mike. I needed to find a way to make him understand that this was the only thing that mattered. I had succumbed to temptation, but I saw that this course of action would benefit us financially in the long run. My actions were a fall from grace. From grace will affect our sex life. It is evident that God is unaware of the vibrant, uninhibited sex life that Mike has been craving for years. Upon rolling over and noticing Mike's deodorant on the bedside table, I realized that he had forgotten it in his haste to leave. I picked it up and brought it to my face to smell it. The familiar smell brought tears to my eyes, and I closed them and buried my face in the pillow, I attempted to erase the image of his shocked and pained face from my mind. I heard him say that this was not his intention, but despite this, I did it. As a result, I felt deep regret. I clutched the deodorant to my chest and tried to focus on the positives, namely that we hadn't heard from any of our children. I hope that's true. Mickey didn't tell them anything, and he didn't yell at me or call me names. That should be a good sign, right? I sat up straight. One might hypothesize that Mike was preoccupied with legal matters, including changing locks and emptying bank accounts, and thus unable to communicate with his children or me. His seemingly calm demeanor on the phone could have been a facade, concealing his true intentions, which might have been to undermine me and our marriage. I immediately arose from bed and proceeded to the living room, where I had left my laptop. I retrieved it and returned to the room, where I waited with a growing sense of urgency. It appeared to take an inordinate amount of time for the page to load, during which I was overcome with trepidation. I accessed our bank account and leaned my elbows on the pillows, weeping tears of relief. Mike had not touched the money. I wiped my tears with the corner of the sheet and was about to leave the bank when I was abruptly warned by a faint voice that Mike might still empty his accounts. This does not imply that he will not do so in the future. I was reluctant to provoke any negative consequences from him, but I was also motivated to safeguard my interests. Consequently, I transferred a modest sum to an old account in my name, sufficient to cover the costs of plane tickets, taxes, and food. However, the small icon indicating that there were new messages for me prompted me to reconsider my initial intentions. I proceeded to access the messages and discovered a message from Jake, dated the 25th of January. Yeah, despite the age difference, Jake was texting me. He was 48 years old. My eyes streamed with tears of disappointment and melancholy. Despite everything, I wanted to call him. I wanted to hear him tell me again how sexy I was. I longed to see in his face and body his need. I was displeased with the younger man who initiated this situation. I had consumed alcohol excessively in an attempt to assimilate with my younger classmates. It was, however, a highly satisfying experience, and I found myself unable to cease the behavior. I desired further encounters, a renewed expression of lust, and to see admiration and desire in their eyes. I also desired to hear. I desired to feel as though I was the best woman in their life. I was experiencing a sense of power that was addictive. I was in a state of internal conflict. I was aware that if I responded to Jake's messages, he would come. I wanted this. I emitted a sound that could be described as a whimper. I clenched my fist and pressed it to my lips. I should have resisted. If Mike returns, or if he were to discover this, it could potentially lead to the dissolution of my marriage. I rolled over onto my stomach, causing the laptop to slide off the bed. He fell to the floor with a resounding thud. I was indifferent to his predicament. She was distraught over the loss of her belongings. There would be a price to pay to save my marriage. I must never again give in to my addiction. I must have fallen asleep. Asleep because the next moment sunlight streamed through the window. Feeling terrible, I proceeded to the bathroom to take a shower. I inserted my key into the lock and turned it. It worked. I stopped bowing my head in relief. Mike had not changed the locks, which was a positive sign. He had not emptied the bank accounts or informed the children have not yet served me with divorce papers. It is Thursday, so he has had sufficient time to prepare them. My keys still function. I am confident that Mike will forgive me. It may take time, but he will forgive. I was filled with love. Mike is a good person, the best, and he loves me. He will find a way to come to terms with this, and we will move on. Our actions will have consequences. Mike will always be aware that I derived pleasure from another man's company, and I will be forced to avoid his company entirely. This may be a significant price to pay, but it is a price worth paying. I opened the door, anticipating a chaotic scene. Mike had been single for over 3 months. I had anticipated a considerable degree of disorder, but my initial assessment proved inaccurate. The environment was, in fact, remarkably tidy, particularly in the living room. Upon entering the kitchen and dining room, I observed a similar level of cleanliness. The dust had been meticulously wiped away, suggesting that he may have been preparing the space in anticipation of my return. This would be a positive indication, yet I was uncertain about his whereabouts. It was 6:30. He should be home after work, searching for his dinner. I approached the stove and traced my hand over the burners, noting their frigid temperature. I inspected the refrigerator, noting its contents, including a plate of fried chicken and vegetables wrapped in plastic. Had he prepared this meal in the microwave? There were no dishes in the sink, indicating either that he had washed and dried them or that he had chosen to dine out. I contemplated contacting him via telephone or text message, but after our sole conversation on Tuesday, I was reluctant to do so. It is possible that he did not come to the airport to pick me up, despite my sending him the flight information via SMS. I filled the kettle with water in anticipation of drinking a cup of tea while I waited for it to boil. I considered the contradictory signs that Mike was giving me. On the one hand, he did not act in a way that I could associate with his decision to end our marriage. However, on the other hand, he ignored my voicemails and text messages and did not meet me at the airport. Perhaps he is simply petty and wants to punish me after making tea. I sat down. At my customary location at our table, she observed the table and the surrounding empty chair. So many family dinners have been held there. I smiled, recalling the lively discussions and banter exchanged. We may not have been financially wealthy, but we were certainly in love and happy. I was touched by these memories. Mike will remember them too. He is a sensitive individual when it comes to children. He would not want them to have to choose or divide their time between us. For this reason alone, he will find a way to forgive me. The question of his whereabouts remains unanswered. Where is he leaving the cup of tea on the table? I proceeded to ascend the stairs and traverse the corridor to Mike and my room. He was indeed at home. The bathroom retained a slight warmth. Once again, I was struck by the cleanliness. It was not that Mike was a slob, but I thought that without my presence, he would revert to his stereotypical habits and neglect cleaning up after himself. In deep thought, I returned to the dining room. She sat and sipped tea. Where is he? Where could he go? My stomach growled. I was hungry. I proceeded to the refrigerator to ascertain whether Mike might have saved the chicken dinner for me. Upon lifting the edge of the wrapper and sniffing it, I discerned that it smelled delicious. I then placed the plate in the microwave and sat down at the table while I waited for the beep. I was troubled by the fact that I had no idea where my husband was. I replayed our conversations over the past 16 weeks in an attempt to ascertain what Mike had done to entertain himself. I was able to remember surprisingly little. I then proceeded to look around the room once more. It was not as though he spent his nights at home. A sensation of unease arose in my abdomen. Mike had never been partial to boys' sleepovers or weekend fishing trips. He had always been a family man. Had this attitude undergone a transformation during my absence? My consciousness was stimulated by a vague recollection of a name mentioned in the initial weeks of the course, John Jeremiah Jason. I had the impression that the name commenced with D, but all the potential candidates I considered did not elicit any response. Then, I grasped Jeff's identity, whose surname I could not recall. I hastened to the sideboard. In the notebook, which we kept in a sideboard, I found a page dedicated to the name Jeff. I proceeded to search through the notebook, which was quite old, for the name. I found the page under the letter S, where I discovered the name Jeff Saunders. I added a cell number to my phone, which I later learned was the same number as the one I had been searching for. I entered the number into my phone, and it beeped a few times before going to voicemail. I was frustrated, and I slammed my fist on the table in exasperation. The clang of the microwave, which I had not noticed before, served as a reminder. I was startled to discover that I had not removed the reheated leftovers. I had completely forgotten about food. I decided to consume my dinner while pondering what I would say when I was able to contact Jeff. The roast turned out to be surprisingly tasty. Once my relationship with Mike improves, I will have to encourage him to cook more often. As I continued to chew the last bite, I collected my plate and cutlery and took them to the sink. Now that it was time for my second attempt to call Jeff, I was nervous. What if Mike told him I remembered? What if he attacked me? I sighed, realizing that I would have to. Having made my decision, I accessed my call log and dialed Jeff's number. He answered after the third ring. Hello, he said. This is Jeff. Who's calling? This is Penny Granger. I was wondering if you knew where Mike was. There was a long pause, during which I held my breath, hoping he did not terminate the call. His silence allowed background noise to prevail. It was evident that he was in a location where other individuals were present. Hello, Penny. It has been a considerable period of time since we have spoken. Yes. How are you doing? I am well. How are Jane and the children? Jane is fine. I shuddered, emphasizing his wife's name. It was not an opportune moment to mispronounce her name and potentially offend her husband. Everything is well with us all. What about you? I thought I misinterpreted the tone of Jeff's last question. He knew. It improved. Is Mike with you? Yes, with me. And where are you? At a darts competition. Competition among pairs. I clenched my teeth, holding back a sarcastic response. Jeff was aware that I was eager to learn the whereabouts of my husband. I inquired twice, but it was evident that he was determined to make the revelation as arduous as possible. He responded that it was at a pub, but I was uncertain as to which one. I inquired as to the name of his local pub. I attempted to maintain a pleasant tone, but he was not forthcoming. I thanked him and walked away, irritated by his caustic response. His final words, spoken with a certain degree of sarcasm, were particularly irksome. I then proceeded to utilize the Google search engine to input the name Royal. This search yielded several results, including Royal Hands, Royal George, and Royal Oak. After spending an additional 10 minutes perusing the websites of each pub, I was able to ascertain that the Royal Oak was hosting a couples darts competition. I retrieved my bag and paused in the hallway to assess my appearance. My hair and makeup were not yet in order. I frowned at my reflection and rummaged through my bag for my makeup bag and comb. 5 minutes later, I had completed my preparations and was already walking out the door. Throwing my bag into, I proceeded to the passenger seat of my Toyota and started the engine. While I awaited the opening of the garage door, I entered the address of the Royal Pub into the GPS. Fortunately, the journey was not a lengthy one, as my patience and nerves were already taxed to their limits. I was relieved to discover that the pub had its own. Despite the limited number of available parking spaces, it appeared that darts competitions were a popular pastime. However, as this thought crossed my mind, I paused to consider the role of Mike in these events. Was he simply present to cheer on Jeff and Jean, or did he have a more active involvement? I swallowed my anxiety and proceeded towards the entrance. I followed the noise, leading me into a room. 2 dartboards were positioned against the far wall, and the game was underway. I surveyed the room and observed Mike on the left. His face was oriented towards one of the games, and an attractive blonde was seated next to him. She did not follow the game but watched the entrance, and her gaze was direct. Her gaze conveyed a wealth of information. I felt a warmth spreading across my face. I observed her lightly squeezing Mike's hand, which prompted him to turn and look directly at me. I was uncertain what I anticipated seeing: pain, grief, or anger, perhaps, or perhaps something else entirely. Whatever it wasn't what I expected. I was disconcerted to observe that he appeared to be unchanged. I believe this was the reason I was unable to move. My gaze was fixed upon him, and I was unable to disengage my attention from the scene in my peripheral vision. I observed the blonde woman squeeze his hand once more. My heart sank as I saw Mike place his hand over hers and pat it reassuringly. This gesture indicated that they were acquainted. The conversation then turned to matters of friendship and care. At this point, Mike disappeared from view, blocked from prying eyes by his broad shoulders. The man was standing in my personal space, so I took a step back, not recognizing him until he spoke. "Hello, Penny," he said. "Oh, Jeff. Hi." I stammered. "I came looking for Mike." "I got what you mean, and I'd like to thank you. I am pleased to inform you that he is doing well. I am aware that he must have been upset after he returned from visiting me. I hope this did not affect you and Jane too much." Everything was fine with him, even excellent. This confused me. How can he be okay after I could not finish the sentence after finding out that it became evident that I had been unfaithful to my husband for the past 4 months? I felt a surge of heat to my cheeks, as though they were on fire. Regardless of whether I was culpable or not, it was unseemly of him to reveal my infidelity. I regarded him with a disapproving gaze, wishing I had the chance to turn him into a pile of ash. Jeff laughed. As I regarded him with increasing rage, I clenched my fists. However, this was not a matter for discussion. I was highly skeptical that things were as positive with Mike as you implied. After 28 years of marriage, he still loved me. I was certain that he was devastated, but he was concealing his emotions to avoid making you feel awkward and uncomfortable. This suggests that he is a skilled actor. I was compelled to concur. Upon observing Jeff's actions, I discerned that Mike was adept at appearing unconcerned. He and the blonde individual stood in front of one of the dartboards, with Mike preparing to throw the first dart. It appeared that his partner was a blonde, a fact that I found disagreeable. My dependence on men did not extend to such preferences. I was aware of the attributes of the younger men I encountered, and found them to be akin to meringue, a light, sweet, and tasty dessert. However, I ultimately found them to be lacking in substance, much like sugar. In contrast, Mike represented a premium steak, its flavor developed through a slow cooking process, allowing one to appreciate its full taste. I was perplexed by the identity of this woman I had come to dislike. I was compelled to inquire, but my reluctance to reveal my vulnerability was outweighed by the need to know. Jeff turned his head to look at Mike and the blonde and smiled. "This is Andrea." Once again, Jeff was evasive, answering only my direct question and not offering anything additional. "Is she here with anyone? Is she married?" I hoped that by asking 2 questions at once, I would soon receive 2 answers, yes and no. I was tired and stressed, which made it even more challenging for me to remain patient. Therefore, I was able to ascertain that she was here with someone, but that she was not married. The anxiety I was experiencing grew, and part of me wanted to walk away and not ask the next question. It was a logical question, and I was almost certain that I would not like the answer. Despite my mental preparation, I retreated as if I had been slapped. It did not take him long to respond. I muttered, and the pain nullified my verbal filter. Conversely, Jeff said his eyes were like lasers, burning a hole. He had 4 months to adjust to being alone. He looked again at Mike and the blonde and smiled. He appeared to adapt to the situation with remarkable ease. He looked at me and his smile disappeared. His tone was sharp and cutting. However, it could be argued that I was just as culpable. It has been 8 years since Mike divorced me, and not a day goes by without I do not regret the actions that led to our separation. However, when it became clear that reconciliation was impossible, I was given the opportunity to indulge my addiction. This proved to be a hollow victory, as it did not lead to the desired outcome. I soon realized that a constant sugar diet was ultimately unsatisfying, and the law of diminishing returns was at work. The law of diminishing returns was at work. I spent 8 years searching for that elusive first high. In retrospect, I recognize that I was doomed to fail. I try not to think about how my hobbies have become shorter in duration and how they are becoming less frequent. I also try not to think about the other forbidden boundaries that I crossed. I was previously a reserved lover, concerned that if I exhibited excessive pleasure, my husband would perceive me as promiscuous and lose respect for me. I have since engaged in sexual relationships with a considerable number of individuals, and I have committed acts that I hope my children will never discover about my relationship with them, as it is already tenuous. Upon surveying the kitchen and dining room, I am overcome with a sense of despair. These spaces, which once resonated with warmth and laughter, now appear desolate and silent. They were integral parts of the house, yet now they are merely vestiges of a bygone era. I consider myself fortunate that Mike agreed to sell me his share of the house, for the sale price was below market value, particularly given that I never returned to complete my nursing degree and remain a general nurse to this day. However, it is challenging to feel positive when I am aware of the underlying reasons for his generosity. Andrea was affluent, and she desired Mike, with or without financial resources. I was certain that they had embarked on a global journey. I was aware of the world, Scotland, Venice, Florence, the Greek islands, and more. I was aware of this because they had paid for all the children, hers, his, and the grandchildren, to meet them in Hawaii in a few weeks. This meant that I would spend Christmas alone again. I looked at my watch and saw that it was time to go to work. I packed my bag and headed to I looked at my reflection in the mirror and observed that I am 56 years of age. I have reached an age where it is becoming increasingly challenging to attract younger men. In fact, the younger men are no longer in their early 20s, but are now in their 30s and even 40s. I sigh in resignation, as I am unsure of what else I could do. It is challenging to find a suitable marriage partner at my age, particularly a good one. Regardless of one's personal qualities, few individuals are interested in marrying someone of my age. My reputation precedes me, and I have considered relocating to another region to improve my prospects. However, this would entail moving away from my children, with whom I have limited contact. There would be an entire continent between us, while Mike and his Andrea were probably relaxing and enjoying my ties. I proceeded to change the bedding and set the thermometer. I will conclude my days as a general nurse, compromising both my marriage and my career. For what? For nothing. For the taste of sweet, yet bitter, sugar. I blinked away tears of self-pity. It is unfortunate that tears are shed. Those who subscribe to our channel will be spared the anguish of discovering that their partner is unfaithful. We encourage you to listen to the next story, which is even more distressing than this one. If you are under the age of 18, we advise you not to listen to the next story.